This happened not long ago. I'm 15 going on 16. I live in New York City and have had some strange late-night experiences before, but none as disturbing as this one. My parents were out of town. It was a summer night. I was at a pretty large party. There was quite a lot of drinking and smoking, which is expected at a party with a bunch of 14 to 20-year-olds. I'm pretty tall for my age, like 6'1", and I have a pretty deep voice, so I easily pass as older. I knew that I had to get home on my own, so I tried to regulate the amounts of drink that I had. At around maybe 2 or 3 a.m., I realized that I should start heading home. It was a Friday, and I didn't have anything to do the next morning, but still, I was tired and figured most people would be leaving soon anyway. For those of you that don't know, New York City's transit system runs 24/7, 7 days a week, so I wouldn't have any problems hopping on a train, even at 3 a.m., to get home. The party was in Far Rockaway in Queens, and I live in an apartment building on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, so I had a pretty long ride to get home. I wasn't worried, though. I was no stranger to long commutes on the subway. I would take the train everywhere I went since I was like 9 or 10. I headed over to the Far Rockaway, Mott Avenue train station and sat on one of the benches. There's a screen that says what time the train will be coming, and this late at night it would be a while. After maybe 10 or 15 minutes of waiting, the screen showed A train, Inwood 207th Street, 20 minutes. I waited for a while longer until I saw the headlights of the train coming down the tracks. The train arrived, but since this was the first stop, I had to wait about another 10 minutes until it would actually leave the station. I got on and a few people exited, leaving the car empty. I sat all the way at the end of the car, so I wouldn't be next to anyone if anyone else got on. At this point, I was really tired and felt like I was about to just pass out right there, so I did. For those of you that don't know, New York City subway cars are rectangular with 3 doors on each long side which open at the stations and 1 door on each short side where people can walk through from other cars. I woke up a little while later to the sound of one of the short side doors close to me opening. A man who appeared to be homeless walked in, and the smell immediately hit me like a truck. I remember him having raggy clothes and tangled hair. He looked at me.
"Hey brother, you got $1?"
Nah man, sorry," I responded.
"Come on man, I know you got something,"
he insisted, smiling for some reason. For real, I don't, I'm sorry." I didn't have any singles, just a few 20s, and I wasn't about to give this guy $20. He just stood there for a few seconds and said,
"Alright, whatever,"
and walked away, still smiling. Now, this didn't strike me as weird at all, not yet at least. I've been living in New York my whole life, and I'd gotten used to all the homeless people in the subway and them asking for money. It didn't bother me. I looked out at the stop I was at. I was just in Brooklyn. The A train ran local at night, so my ride would be longer than usual. I figured I still had a pretty long way to before I got to the 42nd Street, Manhattan, where I would transfer to the Q train that brought me to the station near my apartment. So I went back to sleep. When I woke up again, I was in downtown Manhattan, I think like West 4th or 14th Street. I was getting close to my stop. I looked around and the train wasn't empty anymore. There was a guy sitting on the other end of the train with his headphones on, and in the middle of the car, there was a guy sitting there, head down, muttering to himself. I was pretty sure it was the same guy that had asked me for money before. I thought that was a little weird, but I wasn't nervous or anything. I just figured he had some sort of mental illness or something. After a little while, I arrived at the 42nd Street station. The guy was still there, and when I got off the train, he must have been going in a similar direction as me because he got up and off the train also. Now, 42nd Street station is huge, and I needed to go all the way to the other side of the station to get from the A train side on 8th Avenue to get to where the Q train was on 7th Avenue. Walking through the huge station, specifically the passage that takes you from one side to the other, I'll admit was a little creepy. It was eerily quiet for a place that usually is packed with so many people during the daytime. The only other people around now were late-night workers and homeless people. I arrived on the side where the Q train would be going uptown towards my stop. When I got to the platform, there were only maybe 3 or 4 other people that I saw waiting for the train like I was. I walked over to the benches and sat down to wait. I looked up and saw that there was a guy a little further down the platform on the side from where I came from, standing there, muttering to himself, like having a full-on conversation with nobody. I couldn't make out his face from where I was sitting, but I was sure it had to be the same homeless guy that I'd seen on the A train. Now I was getting a little suspicious. Was he following me? The train arrived after a few minutes and I got on. I'd only have a few stops from where I was to my apartment, so there was no point in trying to sleep. The man boarded the same car as me, and I could see clearly now it was him, the same guy. There wasn't anybody else in the car at the moment. I wasn't entirely nervous, but at the same time I was definitely on edge now. I tried not to look at him to avoid eye contact. He was still mumbling to himself, and now I could pick up on some things he was saying. Random phrases like, "Should I? Maybe. Help me." When I got to my stop, I promptly got up and got off the train. Honestly, at this point, I wasn't even surprised when the man got off too, still talking to himself. The station was completely empty. It was 4, going on 5 a.m. by now. I walked through the station, up the stairs, toward the exit, ignoring the man who was definitely following me. When I got to the street level, I started walking faster towards my apartment. The station was on 72nd Street. I still had to walk a few blocks further up to get to my apartment. I looked back a few times to see the man, still behind me, speaking pretty loudly now. I was honestly more annoyed than scared at this point. Maybe it was the tiredness, maybe it was the little bit of liquid courage left in me, but I was seriously done with this guy's stuff, so I stopped walking, turned around and said, "Hey, can I help you?"
"I just want some money. I know you got some."
"Listen, I don't. Leave me alone or I'm calling the cops." He said something about how I don't know all the stuff that he's been through, and then just walked in the other direction, still muttering angry slurs under his breath to himself. I continued home, shaken but too tired to think about what happened at this point. I got to my apartment and went to bed. The next morning, my friend who lives in the same building as me called me and asked if I'd heard about what happened last night. I hadn't told anyone about the incident yet, so I said I didn't know what he was talking about, and he explained. Apparently a neighbor in our apartment building who was coming back from an early morning jog or something called the police because there was a man lying outside the doors to our apartment. As he was arrested, he was yelling and screaming, resisting arrest, yelling stuff about how his life was horrible and how he was waiting to kill that person last night that didn't have the heart to hand over any money to him. I assumed the guy that he was referring to was the guy that I had encountered last night, and the guy that he was talking about was me. And he must have followed me all the way to my apartment, which, given how tired I was, must have not been that hard to do without me noticing. Who knows what would have happened if the police didn't take him away. The man was obviously seriously ill, and I do hope that he gets the help he needs. All I can say to you all is be safe when you're alone at night. Especially in the city, always watch your back. This story didn't actually happen to me, rather to a close friend of mine. He told me the story a few hours ago and I wanted to share. He lives in Hayward and was attending a march for the BLM movement at around 4 p.m., I think. I don't know which streets or anything specific like that. He had just sent me a couple of videos of the crowd marching and taking a knee. So, after about 10 minutes, he said that they were passing through a street lined with shops and alleyways. There was an older man sitting on a curb by one alleyway watching the march. Jordan describes the man as looking upper 40s, wearing a black and white flannel shirt and jeans and a cap. Jordan had the misfortune of walking nearby said alleyway, and the man stopped him, saying something along the lines of what he needed help fixing his passenger seat since the recliner handle was broken, and it was a two-person job to get it back into its upright position. The man gestured towards his car, which Jordan examined. It was a black Chevy Malibu that was parked in possibly the most sketchiest part of the alley, right towards the back, kind of hidden behind a trash dumpster. Jordan declined and quickly walked away before the man could say anything else. Now for his sake, I wish the story ended here, but I wouldn't be posting it here if it did. I think sometime later, like an hour maybe, Jordan decided to start heading home while the march continued. He says he was cutting across some field that was in between houses where only 2 other people were in sight, and as soon as he emerged at the other side, his air was suddenly cut off as a thick arm wrapped around his throat and began aggressively yanking him backwards. Of course, Jordan yelled as loud as he could, and thankfully the aforementioned 2 guys began to rush to his aid, shouting at Jordan's attacker. The guy let go and pushed Jordan. As Jordan stumbled forwards, he spun around and saw the guy who had asked him for help with his car, hopping into the Chevy Malibu and speeding off. The 2 other people asked Jordan if he was okay and comforted him and whatnot. Keep in mind that Jordan only told me this over a few texts and I haven't gotten a chance to talk to him in public about it, so some details were spared. I think Jordan contemplated calling the police but didn't think it was worth it. He told me that they were probably already busy enough and he might be ignored or have an extremely long response time, to which the only info he had was a description of the guy. He hadn't gotten the guy's license plate. Jordan went home and that's pretty much all he told me so far. It might sound cliche, but please, everyone stay safe. These are terrible times, and with all the looting and protests, stuff like this is bound to happen in the shadows. Like all women, I have a fair amount of creepy experiences with men. I have a whole host of stories I could tell here, but one of my more memorable stories happened when I was a student. For context, I went to university in France and spent a few months doing an internship in Paris, where this encounter took place. I was only 20 years old, and so, it being a Friday night, I was on my way to meet some friends at a restaurant. The apartment I was living in was in close proximity to a couple of metro stops, and the line I needed was a few blocks away on a pretty busy street. When I was only a block from the stop, a guy looking to be about my age suddenly approached me, asking me if I knew where the metro stop was. I indicated the large yellow M glowing above the stop on the corner and thought that that would be the end of our conversation. Instead, he fell into step with me, explaining that he wasn't from the city and didn't know the train lines too well. I said it was no problem, and he gave me a funny look as he asked, "You aren't from here, are you?" I thought. He was right. French is my second language, and although I've spoken it from a young age, I still have an accent on a few words. Normally, I don't mind having an accent or people remarking that I'm not French, but when a guy you just met on the street one night comments on it, it can make you a little uneasy. I confirmed, though, that I wasn't French, and we actually ended up having a decent conversation as we walked to the metro stop, down the stairs, and through the turnstiles. During that first, and what would turn out to be our only conversation, he seemed nice enough and didn't set off any red flags. I told him where I was from and what I was studying, and he told me that he was in the city visiting some friends. We ended up getting on the same train, though even then I questioned whether he was actually going the same way as me or not, and kept talking until my stop. Right before I got off the train, he asked for my numbers so that we could meet up sometime, and in a move completely out of character for me, as is talking to strangers, I did. Big mistake. He texted me that Sunday, asking if I wanted to meet up on Wednesday. I agreed, but then he asked if we could meet at Châtelet. For anyone who doesn't know, Châtelet is an enormous metro stop near the center of Paris. Several metro lines run through it, as do other trains that go out of the city proper. It also connects to a huge shopping mall. When he asked this, I started to feel uneasy. My intuition told me that there was something wrong with wanting to meet up in a place that had so many ways in and out, a place where if you got on a certain train or were forced to do so, no one could find you. My mind tends to jump to worst-case scenarios, but my gut is never wrong. In any case, I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt, as he supposedly didn't know the city that well, so I told him that Châtelet was pretty big and it might be hard to find each other in there. I suggested meeting up at the bookstore in the connected mall, still a public place but less hectic, but he didn't seem to like the idea and stopped replying to my messages. The next day, Monday, I was on my way to a meeting with my boss when my phone buzzed and I saw it was a text message from him. "Can you call me now? Another message came in. Or can I call you?" my intuition spoke up again in the back of my mind, telling me that something still wasn't right. I replied, "I'm going into a meeting right now, let me get back to you." With that, I turned my phone all the way off and didn't turn it back on again until after the meeting was over and I was on the bus home an hour and a half later. Turning it back on, I almost dropped it as it started to buzz uncontrollably with several dozen text messages loading simultaneously. I only scanned them, there being so many, but they seemed to range from proposing that we meet at a friend's house on Wednesday night to "Why won't you answer? Where the F are you?" followed by a number of missed call notifications, all from his number. My intuition was doing more than pinging at this point, so when his number popped up on the screen again, I turned the phone off again until I reached my apartment. Once again, I dared turn it back on and saw even more missed texts and calls from him. Pretty spooked at this point, I shoved the phone back into my purse and made dinner, not even looking at the phone until well after I had eaten. Once I could stomach it, I took the phone out of my purse. I felt a shiver go up my spine as I saw that he had called me no less than 16 times, and that his text messages had become more and more vulgar before ending with a final, "Fine, I guess this isn't working out. Maybe I'll see you again. Goodbye." I've never blocked a number so fast in my life and immediately called my mom. I could barely hold the phone again, though this time it was because I was shaking so badly. To this day, I can't help but feel that I dodged something extremely dangerous, more specifically, someone who was probably just looking for a girl to take advantage of and jumped at the chance when he met a young foreign one in a big city. I'm still not sure what possessed me to give him my number, but I console myself with the fact that I didn't tell him I was living near that metro stop where he approached me. I just have a feeling that he might have come looking for me. The lesson that I have taken away from this incident, aside from never giving my number out ever again, is to always trust my gut. She saved me before, saved me that day, and will most likely do it again. Back in 2005, I was 15 years old, and like any teenage girl, my main source of income was babysitting. I mainly babysat for two families. Family A, which was every Monday and Wednesday for 4 hours in the afternoon, and Family B, which was different evenings when the parents had events they wanted to go to. The moms of the two families were first cousins, and the mom of Family B used to babysit myself and my sisters when we were little. All of us, myself, Family A, and Family B, lived within a 5-mile radius of each other in the Michigan countryside. On the night my story takes place, I was babysitting for Family B. It was a Friday night in the middle of summer, and the two children, a boy 4 years old and a girl 2, went to bed fairly easily. I know it was after 10 p.m. because it was dark out when the little boy came downstairs and said he couldn't sleep, so he wanted to sit on the couch with me. I was watching the movie The Patriot on TV and let him snuggle up with me, and he went right back to sleep. Shortly after he came down, the phone rang. I looked at the caller ID to see if it was the family calling when I saw it was my home calling. I answered the phone, and it was my dad. He said something that basically boiled down to this. "Hey, so there's an escaped convict in the area. Police are out looking for him, so if you hear police sirens or a helicopter, don't be alarmed." And then he hung up. I, quite frankly, was terrified. I was a 15-year-old girl alone in an old farmhouse. The nearest neighbor was about a quarter of a mile away, and I had 2 babies in the house that I had to protect. My dad had sounded so cavalier, like he was warning me that it was going to rain. I had no idea what this man had done to be chased by the police, but it had to be bad. I went looking around the house for something to defend us with. All I had were kitchen knives, no baseball bat, no crowbar, and no access to the gun in the safe. I ended up calling my dad and asking him to come stay with me. He actually thought I was being ridiculous, but I didn't care. I felt better. Thankfully, nothing happened. When the parents got home an hour later, my dad explained why he was there. The mom was very understanding and showed me how to get into the gun safe and where the bullets were. Like I said, she was our babysitter growing up, and she was basically my older sister. She was and still is a big believer in the Second Amendment and self-defense. But my story didn't end there. That next Monday, I was babysitting for Family A, which had 2 girls, 4 years and 2 years old. The older girl was telling me a story about someone in the backyard and how they couldn't go back in their house and had to stay outside all night. When the mom got home, I asked her about it. It turns out that the previous Friday, the police had been at their house until the wee hours of the morning. Family A's neighbor had a restraining order against her ex-boyfriend for domestic violence, and he had shown up at her house late on Friday. She called the cops, and he had fled into the property of Family A because he had several arrest warrants out. The police kept Family A out of their house for safety reasons while they searched the area, and they eventually found the guy and took him to jail. That's what all the fuss was about that Friday when I was babysitting for Family B. Fortunately, he never got close to Family B's house. That incident was the start of me being more proactive in safety, making sure I knew how to lock the doors, where any weapons were, and to make sure I had a knife with me at all times. If something like that ever happens again, I know I will handle the situation much better. I'm a 17-year-old girl who goes to the local high school here. I never really had much dating experience, but this guy clearly didn't have much either. When the story takes place, I was around 14 years old. For some quick context, in my state, you are legally allowed to date someone under 18 so long as you are 2 years older or younger, meaning that someone who is 16 can date an 18-year-old, but a 14-year-old dating an 18-year-old could lead to serious consequences. I've been a part of a classroom that we refer to as BMC, which is a class for kids with behavioral issues, such as anger or depression. I've been a part of this program since middle school, but never have I been through a person quite like this. I normally keep to myself, listening to my music at a deafening volume, and because of this, I never had friends in that classroom, especially since this was during my freshman year and sophomore year. I was nowhere near popular during that time, yet I did happen to get several desperate guys approaching me. Normally I would reject them, yet for some reason this time I didn't. Maybe it was pity, perhaps. I was waiting at the far end of the bus loop one day, given the fact that my bus was a special needs bus. As I was listening to music, I saw a boy approach me. He was bigger in size, always seemed to wear the exact same superhero shirt and jacket. I still to this day don't even know if he even washed it. For this story, we'll call him Freddy, mainly because he reminded me of the freaky animatronic. Anyway, he came up to me and told me that he had a crush on me, despite me not even knowing his name prior to this point. I was a little creeped out by this, so I was a little lost in terms of words. He asked for my number. I said yes, but then what he said next later gave me goosebumps. This is very important to keep in mind. "Don't tell your parents," he said. I asked why, and all he said was, "I could get in trouble." At this time, I was very gullible and thought, why get him in trouble when he doesn't know better? See, I'm autistic, and at the time I had a feeling he was as well. Before you go off and tell me that he really doesn't know any better, I should tell you that just because someone is autistic doesn't mean that they are dumb or can't be manipulative. Even people with mental illnesses can be a bit of a bad apple. I know that from experience with Freddy and many others. When I gave him my number, we small-talked for a small bit until my bus finally arrived. Even at the time, I was so relieved to see my driver to see that I would escape Freddy. So I bid my goodbyes and he waved. He then said to me, "I love you." I nearly vomited at that statement. I gave him a bewildered look and he asked, "Too soon?" "Yeah, too soon," I confirmed. I hurried onto my bus and sat down. I tried to avoid looking in the window so I didn't have to look at him. Once again, he was far from attractive or even hygienic. I soon got blown up by texts from him to the point that I had to turn off notifications for his texts. But then when I did respond, he would complain and ask why I wasn't responding. When I said I was busy, he would just ask when I would be done. When I told him I didn't know in order to buy myself some time away from him, he'd just text me 10 to 15 minutes later asking if I was done. Clingy people were my biggest turnoff, especially since I was that person at one point as well. I know that being on the receiving end of that sort of affection can be very uncomfortable. When I finally had enough, I casually told my parents the whole story. They panicked and told me to block him while they contacted my BMC manager. The next day, my BMC manager called me to see her privately. She explained that even though he was a senior, he had attempted to pull these things off with several girls before me. She explained that he knew full well what he was doing and that I had to stay away from him. I got scolded by her and family that next time. I should communicate what is happening, especially given the fact that this boy was far from the first boy to attempt to take advantage of me. He was luckily one of the few that failed, thankfully. I am sad to say that even though I went through this experience, I still am too gullible and always have been. And because of this, I'm asking all of you, regardless of your gender, to consider what it is you want. If you don't want to follow your gut or communicate your feelings, you could fall into the same trap I've fallen into more times than I like to admit. My name is Chloe, I'm 21 and I'm from Scotland. In 2018, me, my ex, and his little brother decided to explore abandoned places. We stumbled across an old abandoned mental hospital. Lennox Castle Hospital is the name. We decided to check it out, bearing in mind it is approximately 10 p.m., so it was dark. We went in having to climb rocks and stuff, and when we got in, we were just wandering around enjoying scaring each other like you do. My ex, who we'll call C, went into one of the rooms. Me and his brother stood outside. We'll call his brother R. Me and R were standing at the window of the room C was in when we heard keys being shaken behind us. I thought it was my keys, but then I remembered C had them in his pocket and he was in front of us. We kept hearing movement as well when there wasn't any wind. The next time I went up was with 4 of my friends towards the end of 2018. The middle of winter and around 10 to 11 p.m., so it was pitch black. There was me, A, K, J, and T. Me and T kept hearing high-pitched screams coming from above us, but no one else had actually heard them, and they thought we were just joking. We also kept hearing movement in the bushes, and again, no wind. The walk back down was probably the most terrifying thing to ever happen to me. T told me she had seen glowing red eyes in the trees. I told her it's her mind playing tricks, trying to create a reason for the noises we heard. We walked further down and I had the feeling that I had to look into the trees. And as I looked, I saw them. The red eyes. I tried to pass it off, telling myself that it was an animal in the trees, but Jay had the light and it was way ahead of us, but not only that, the trees were far apart and on a hill. The eyes were between the trees and looked like they were floating. No one else had seen or heard anything. We had no explanation for why it was just me and T who had seen them. Fast forward to tonight, 11 p.m. Me and my best friend Jed decided to check it out. We walked up but kept hearing screeching. We passed it off as possibly being foxes. The movement started up again just as I remembered it. The screeching was the same noise I heard before, but this time Jed had heard it. We got to the hospital and we were quite far back from it. I had my flashlight on and I pointed it towards the building. Jed stood mesmerized by it as it's a lovely structure. I stood my light to one of the windows and I had saw a railing. The railing looked like it had a black figure standing, holding on. I mentioned it to Jed and all he said was, "No, top left." He paused. I asked him what it was and he rushed me back to my car. When we got back to the car, he said he had seen a pure black figure in the top left window, which twitched its head as if it were trying to get us to go to it. All the way back to the car, we hear footsteps and the screeching again. This place definitely has something going on, and I will not stop going there until I find out exactly what. This happened to my grandpa. I'm not sure exactly when this happened, but this was when all my younger aunts and uncles weren't married yet and still lived with them. In all, I had 7 uncles and 5 aunts, just from my dad's side of the family. Years ago, my uncles bought a house and my grandparents lived with them. A lot of paranormal stuff has happened in that house, and I don't know why my grandparents didn't move out sooner. At the time of this incident, everyone was out shopping or doing whatever they used to do outside of the house, and it was just my grandparents' home. My grandpa sat in his big chair, as always, and was occupied by the television. Usually my grandma would stand behind that big chair and just watch TV with my grandpa. I don't know why she always did that when they had so many other couches to sit on. After a while of my grandparents just watching TV, my grandpa spoke. "Honey, go grab me something to eat. I'm hungry." My grandpa waited for an answer. "Did you hear me?" Silence. My grandpa was in his late 70s, so his body was quite weak. That's why instead of turning around to see if my grandma was still there or not, he reached over his shoulder to where she'd usually be. Instead of a shirt, however, he felt a soft breast that would belong to a young lady. Just as he was about to use his strength to turn around to see who or what was behind him, he felt a hand on his ear and side of his head. The hand then slowly started moving towards the middle of his face. Once the palm of the hand covered his cheek and the fingers reached his nose and mouth, he opened his mouth and grabbed a hold of one of the fingers and bit as hard as he could. As he spit out the finger, he felt the hand pull away fast. He finally looked behind him and saw no one. He didn't bother wasting his energy to look around, as he knew he wasn't going to find anyone or anything because, as he recalled, he didn't see or taste any blood when he bit the finger off. But unexpectedly, the finger that he had bit off had fallen onto the floor, and it was real. There was no blood or anything, just a clean, chewed-off finger. My grandma finally showed up as my grandpa picked up the finger. "Here," he said, handing her the finger. As expected, my grandma freaked out and asked, "What is this?" He explained to her what happened, and he told her to keep the finger for good luck, as he said. It may seem crazy, but my family is a religious shaman family, and we, or the elders at least, believe these things. I've actually never seen the finger myself, but one day when I was young, I saw my grandma in her room picking up a small, red triangular pouch that she dropped. I didn't know then, but usually those pouches were filled with herbs believed to keep you healthy, so I stepped into the room asking, "What is that?" She smiled before answering, "It's a finger."